With that, I wanted to ask you a question. And I'm a little, when I was in the military, and I'm going to be honest about it, my unit was a lot of people that had misconduct. They were using a lot of Percocets. There was a lot of PTSD going on, but we just didn't have a word for it. And some of them didn't get honorably discharged. They got dishonorable, bad conduct. And when you get out with not with honorable, you don't get a lot of the privileges you get honorable discharge. How many of those come here for assistance? I mean, what could be done for them? Because it's hard to see, like, you're also 18, 19, 20. What do you really know about life at that age? How is the life for them here, and how do you guys also try to outsource to help them?
So I would say I think you see it less now than you did,
Thank God.
right, 5, 10 years ago. But again, because most of the veterans coming out now might not even be combat veterans, so some of the exposures aren't the same. But bad papers, right, having bad papers, because that limits your ability to access, right, all the VA. Now, the VA has changed a lot in response to that. I believe, I can't think how long ago it happened, but they started saying, okay, well, even if you had a discharge under general, right, or even dishonorable conditions, you could still maybe access healthcare, right? I do think, like, we've connected with lawyers for students to help them address bad papers before. That's a process, and it's a process outside of here, and it's complicated.
It takes years.
Right. And yeah. And then they're always welcome here to use the facility and the services, and for us to get them support, but they might not, be able to use their GI Bill, right? So I don't know how many we see often, because it's the GI Bill, right, that really does give a lot of that access to higher education, and you have to have good papers, right, to get it. But we've provided, like, insight and pointing into the right direction. But I don't want to talk to something I don't have as much experience at, right? So I'm aware of it, I've seen it, and I've seen people get through it to access their benefits again. But it's a very isolating thing. I mean, a public service announcement: get a veteran service officer. Find a veteran service officer. They're in they're usually in towns, have their own, counties have their own, the state has their own. Veteran community organizations, VFWs, American Legions, Disabled Veterans of America, they have them. That's who you should work with, right? That is one of they have a ton of resource. Find a good one, talk to other veterans, and we like to God. Yeah, right? We like to tell people.
I'm glad to hear the statistics are lower, because you're right. During time of war, you see more of this behavior take place. There's a lot of confusion. There's also in the stage of adolescence into young adult, you're forming the consciousness of your identity. And think about it, and it's so hard to live those years, because you're trying to justify who you are, where you're going, and you're more open to misconduct. And trust me, the military structures you, discipline, all these things, but there's always that rebellious spirit in you as a young individual. Not everyone, but I would say a vast minority does, that they're dreaming about what their life is going to be, and perhaps you make more mistakes. As you get older, you kind of like bend that road.
I mean, I went in at 21, but you could see the difference between even when I went in at 21 compared to the 18-year-olds who were in, right? And now they're kind of shaped, and you don't really, right? I like to joke that I was probably a mess until I was 29, right? So, and that was after I got out. But I do think too that this past, again, longest period of sustained warfare in American history, and so for our combat veterans in that group, it was unlike other conflicts, because you deployed, you came home, you deployed, you came home, you deployed, you came home. So we were using a much smaller force more frequently, and rushing to adapt, right, to them coming, like in higher education. So we saw a wave of military affiliated students, veterans on campuses after that post 9/11 GI Bill gets passed, but there weren't services on campuses dedicated for them, because there were never that many on campus.
That's a good point.
And so after every conflict, there's usually something set up. But in the past, what's happened is that as the population dwindles, right, you don't need the office anymore, and so it goes away. In working in higher ed and with veterans, I've only met one person who was like, I was hired during the Vietnam War, and I still work at the institution, and that was somewhere here. right? But most schools rushed to create something, and where it's housed also says something. I believe like when they created it, College of Staten Island, you were hired.
It was under
Yeah.
the wellness center. It was under that wellness and health services. It was a part-time position. Although most of the certifying official is usually in the registrar's office because that's where they're certifying their benefits, and it goes to the registrar's office because it's connected to their like term bill and benefits and all that. But the office itself where I was at was under wellness. So I think there's that combination of like, academic services versus student services. Where do you put it?
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, that's a very interesting topic because like who funds like
Right.
for example the program? Is it the DoD? Is it the state? Is it federal level?
Well, we're a state institution. So our office for Rutgers in New Brunswick, our office falls under the University Academic Affairs. And that's because we serve the entire university. However, the other locations at Rutgers have an office, but they're in different areas on their campuses, respectively. So Newark is under Student Affairs. Rutgers, the Veteran Services in Rutgers Camden is under Enrollment Services. And it depends, right? It's just, and in a lot of different schools, right? You're going to see it to Ursula's point, like either in the registrar, financial aid possibly. And those tend to be like, I think, more transactional because, you register your classes, you get your benefits, and that's how it works. Whereas when you have a larger population, you'll see the office created or a separate thing created in a student affairs kind of way. But it just really always depends on the population at the institution and if there's enough there, right? So when Ursula, we're really fortunate to have this. We are to have a house, a separate building, standalone, right? Even compared, we're part of the Big 10, which is Big 18 now, which is the big. It's different on every campus from right east to west coast. All of us have different, looks. All of us have different types of support, right? So it depends on the population, what's around, what type of support is also around for them. How much do they need the institution itself to provide it? How much is community providing? So, there's an expression about the VA that when you know one VA, you know one VA, right? Like it's not, every VA is different. Like some are great, a lot, I'm very for a lot of them great. Some are not great. And it's the same thing, right, with services and what you have access to. Some are great, some aren't great. It's just, I don't think there's a way to take what one school does and replicate it exactly in another location and to find it'll be just as successful. I think a lot of factors go into supporting people and like any group and supporting veterans. And it can't just be institutional. Like we try to create the safety net, and this mostly Ursula and her role, not just here, but outside here.
Reaching out.
Right, because it's got to be a network outside. Because when you're not a student here and you graduate, you lose a lot of the access you had as a student, right? Like, whether career services, you get access for about a year to some of the additional support they provide, but then you don't, and you're an alumni, and that's a different thing. So having a strong network outside of the institution for support is, I think, critical.
Interesting.
I don't think that it was so much of a change. We've always had a reading problem. There's always been a reading problem, right? COVID did not unveil this great big reading problem. COVID unveiled the access and accessibility, right? That woke us up. But we've always had a problem in this country with reading, going back to anti-literacy laws. So I just want to preface what I'm about to say with the fact that our brains were not wired to read. We have to teach it to read, right? It does this great thing, right? It rewires itself, right, to form pathways for reading to develop. A lot of people don't understand that. It's very different than language. Language, you can put a child in a room full of people who are speaking and they will speak. You don't have to teach them how to talk, right? That is not going to happen for reading. You cannot sit someone in a room full of people who are reading, whether they're reading out loud or silently. It's not going to happen. You have to teach it to read, right? That starts very early. What we think is reading starts in kindergarten, and then we build these habits in kindergarten. And if we think that, we're 5 years already behind, right? Reading starts really at the moment of conception. How? all of the stuff that mom eats, all of the environmental pressures and stress impacts the developing brain. Reading is all about the brain. The brain is the main character, right? And so if we understand that, then we have a point of reference. And so how do we build stamina, right? Because in order to learn to read and read well, you have to build stamina. I'm like, this is a race, right? Not for the quick athlete, but it's endurance. And it took us years, decades to get here. My book has only been out since August. It's not going to take months for us to get out. And so people have to come to the point where I came to and say, okay, I reflected, now I see, and now I'm going to do better. When you know better, you do better.
I'm trying to coexist. Yeah, I'm trying to coexist. I'm trying to coexist.